Hello, my name is Nadezhda. You can call me Nadia because it's simple for most people. I'm a software developer at Simus, and I've been a member of the Samba team for a while now. I think it was 2009. Quite a while ago, I used to work for a small company that whose business model was to basically they were trying to make a Linux-based clone of Microsoft Exchange. And so, yeah, they got it, it worked, but at some point their customers were saying, why would we want your Exchange if we still have to pay for Active Directory? And they're like, well, Nadia, we want to replace Active Directory with a Linux. And I'm like, sure, fine. One of my teammates said, you see, there's this very, very nifty thing, it's called Samba 4. Maybe we should basically just use that. And that's how I got into Samba. So my talk today is called from an OpenLDAP backend to Samba, for Samba to a Samba backend for OpenLDAP. Because those of you who have been following my talks on LDAP.com knows that we tried some approaches, and now we're trying a new one. So back in, I think it was 2013, Simus, they provide support services and professional services for OpenLDAP. They approached me and they said, well, we want to integrate Samba with OpenLDAP so that OpenLDAP is the LDAP server for Samba 4. We just have to rewrite like 40, 50 million lines of, 1,000 lines of code. How hard can it be? And I said, yeah, okay. So that's how I got into this one. And back then, Samba used to only have a TDB backend, which significantly limited the size of the database and the number of objects that were supported. It was also much slower in terms of its LDAP service. So that project really thought, and we still think, that could improve on that performance. So basically we wanted to combine OpenLDAP's excellent LDAP service with the amazing know-how that the Samba and the Samba team had accumulated over the years in terms of Active Directory internals. So the point back then was to rewrite all the LDB modules as OpenLDAP overlays and move that functionality inside OpenLDAP, and then have Samba still act as RPC server, as authentication, but communicate with OpenLDAP, who will be holding the databases. So, because it seemed a huge task, we decided to start with the barely existing legacy OpenLDAP backend that was written by Andrew Bartlett quite a few years before. And it basically connected Samba through LDAP to OpenLDAP and forwarded its request there. The problem with this backend is that because of the differences in Samba schema, this backend had to constantly remap objects. So it had this object class Samba 4 top that basically added all additional attributes, and on every object it had to add this additional class so that OpenLDAP could process it. And it was complicated and slow, but we decided we could start there, use it for starters. It was good because it provisioned, when it provisioned Samba, it would create a swap decom for OpenLDAP that created the partitions, and also configuration for refint and member of overlays to implement linked attributes and indexing. It also created a schema for that OpenLDAP could load. So then it populated the databases, and so we thought this would be a nice place to start. So yeah, this is what, on the left, this is what the standard top class looks like, and this is what Active Directory's top class look like. So this LDAP backend had to basically compensate for this all the time. So we were hoping to do something like this, have all the modules, or at least the modules we needed, recreated as overlays in OpenLDAP, have Samba maintain some of the overlays that were needed in Samba, but not in the OpenLDAP, and have Samba handle in all protocols except LDAP. So we started doing this, but we found out that Samba modules were just too interconnected. It was very difficult to pick one and try to implement it, just that module. They rely on specific order, or at least that was how it was back then, haven't looked in a while. They sent each other controls to modify each other's behavior, and some of them are immensely complicated.
Only got worse.
Right. So where did we get with this approach? Well, obviously I learned to write OpenLDAP overlays. We modified OpenLDAP's internal schema so that Samba 4 top mapping was no longer necessary. We were able to remove that logic from the legacy backend for Samba. And I decided to start with the easiest stuff because it was a big unknown to me. So we had an overlay that created instance type. We had a show deleted handler. We did some constructed and operation attributes. Now, this whole time, in order to test this, we would provision Samba with the legacy backend, and then basically traffic still had to go through Samba. But we, sometimes we somehow remove this module from Samba, move them to OpenLDAP and see how it works. Some attempts I made to recreate the access checks. Basically, the farthest we got, something that actually worked, was we were able to have a module that in OpenLDAP that created the security descriptors of Samba. It used a lot of Samba libraries, basically the Samba NDR code, the Samba code that creates this, that encodes and decodes these security descriptors. But the logic was inside OpenLDAP. But the only reason it actually worked is because Samba was still passing the security token as a control to it. I mean, we couldn't construct it ourselves yet. So we decided that this approach might not be the best. So we said, okay, let's try to just write overlays and test them directly through OpenLDAP, see where we can get. We still relied on Samba's provisioning, but traffic was no longer going through Samba. It would go straight through OpenLDAP, see what we can do this way. And where we got is basically the most successful thing of this approach was that we wrote an AD schema overlay, which basically receives, during provisioning from Samba, it receives the Active Directory schema information as an add request. It's all contained in CN equals schema, so it gets it as a class object, and it creates a proper schema definition for OpenLDAP and registers it. So essentially, during provisioning, we were able to import into OpenLDAP a schema that it could use. So it no longer needed a hard-coded schema, and again, this Samba 4 top became completely unnecessary. It also created index configuration, and it created a member of configuration. So it did get somewhere, but again, it was only operational in the context of that particular object. You need someone to feed you that data as LDAP requests, at least initially. Then it loads it from the database again, but at least initially. that's how it worked. So I think it was in 2009. Problem is, Samba went a long way during this time. It just, there is now an LMDB backend for Samba, which eliminated a lot of the scalability and speed issues. It switched to multi-process model. And at some point, you know, it was not even possible to provision the legacy OpenLDAP backend anymore, and that's fine, because you can't expect people to keep such old code that's only used for temporary purposes. So I'm not sure why I moved this here. I'm sorry. So Andrew Bartlett basically caught me at one of these conferences and says, I see you're still crazy enough to keep doing this, so why don't you just you know, integrate the entire LDB stack as it is in Samba? And actually he had been proposing this from the very start, but while Samba's database was TDB, there was no point to it. It would not bring us anything. But now that Samba has an LDB backend, it might be worth a try. And again, I said, okay, and that's how I got into this one. So basically, this is what we're trying to do. We will write, or we are writing, a backend for OpenLDAP, which is not exactly an LDB backend, but because it does not need just the plain LDB library. It needs the Samba LDB with all the modules in it, so it's a Samba backend, essentially. And then that will probably not be enough. So we will be working, hopefully, with the Samba team to refactor the LDB stack so that it itself grants better performance, and it also becomes much easier to separate the modules if that becomes necessary. Samba is much more mature now. I mean, back when we were writing the LDB stack, you just want to get things working. You know, you still need to turn them off and on, but now the need for that is much less. And if that doesn't prove enough, then we might decide if it's plausible to wrap the LDB modules inside separate overlays, or even rewrite some of the overlays in OpenLDAP if that proves to bring us some performance increase. But basically, this approach uses the Samba code wholesale, whereas before we were just using occasional functions for encoding and data structures. Now we have to load libsamba in order for this to work. So yeah, this is the first step that we're currently working on. When you run the system, you have Samba provision your databases. And then it's running, but it's swapd or OpenLDAP that will be handling OpenLDAP traffic. And both these processes will have the complete LDB stack in them, and access the same databases. I'm pretty sure it's not going to work great, but if we can get to here, then we can move on. To the next step, where, as I mentioned, we will make sure that the LDB stack is much less intertwined as it was, and at this point we will also have to do something about LDB thread safety, obviously, because after this step we want to do some benchmarking, determine where we are, and see where we want to get and how by profiling. Actually, I remember your talk a few years ago when you profiled Samba. It was a great talk, and I'm going to go back to it for ideas. And this is where we hope to eventually get. Basically, Samba will not be handling any LDAP traffic, and it does not need to have in it most of the LDB modules, because OpenLDAP will have that logic. So even though it's been a while and it has its issues, we are still determined to try and get this to work, because it will lead to a much better integration between the two systems. It's because a lot of developers development still happens inside Samba, then we will be able to deliver usable solutions to users faster, because we don't have to rewrite everything that's new in Samba in OpenLDAP. Like I mentioned, now Samba is much faster and much better, and that is also making this approach more feasible. So what do we have now? Oh, I actually have a lot of time. What we have now is this OpenLDAP backend that's called back-Samba. And currently on init, it loads a load param context based on the sambaXP that's been created when you provision Samba. It creates a system session because we haven't handled authentication yet, so for now everything is system, but we'll think about it later. It creates an LDB context and it hangs it off the user session. It's similar to what Samba does right now. So it connects to some LDB, and it has operation handlers for LDAP operations that basically translate them to LDB operations using the LDB build rec functions. We load a bunch of Samba libraries, LDB, talak, host config, which is for the load param context, some DB, and probably by the time I'm actually done with it, there'll be much more. It's a separate module for OpenLDAP that currently lives in the contrib subdirectory, because this is basically a place in the code base where external modules are contributed. That's mostly at the moment for licensing issues. And there is a public repo at this address. It's, not that it's much code. The thing is that these handlers are not very big. They just have to translate from one data structure to another at this point. And, LDB hopefully does all the rest. But my guess is that will change considerably because we have a lot of improvements to make. So this is what our swapdconf looks like. It's very simple. Just database Samba, and we still keep this root DN because, like I said, because we're using the system session for everything. We don't have real authentication yet. So for the time being, until we get the handlers actually working, this is fine, and then we'll get to actually proper authentication, for which purpose Samba has to be running. So what's the current workflow? We build and install Samba, build and install OpenLDAP and back-Samba, provision Samba with Samba tool, start OpenLDAP, and perform LDAP requests using LDAP tools or Python scripts. Something like a demo. It's a demo-ish because essentially I managed to get this working 5 minutes before the end of Ralph's talk. So we have our OpenLDAP here running with the new backend. And here, I'm now going to try and create an organizational unit. And it didn't fail, and OpenLDAP is still alive. Surprise. And no, I don't have search running yet, so I can't verify it this way, but if you try to create the same thing again, it says, nope, you can't, because it's already there. So, and I know it's not much, but believe me, this is farther we've ever gotten this so far, so I am extremely proud of this. Of course, I'm not even sure if we have loaded the complete LDB stack correctly. That's something I have to debug and make sure and check. And when it.
The movie, it's alive. It's alive.
Yep. No, not from the start. Sorry. I haven't done any presentations in 4 years, so. But it's, you know, what you just saw is something like this. So, so next to-dos, the root DSC. Root DSC is currently, you know, as it's supposed to be generated by OpenLDAP, and it has no idea of the partitions or the proper schema. So basically, we'll have to find a way for root DC to either be generated correctly from the front end of OpenLDAP, or have OpenLDAP leave that to its backend, which it currently cannot do. And schema, because we are hoping to be able to basically leave all schema checks to the LDB stack, because it has this, you know, big and nice schema module that does all the necessary checking, and for once we don't need to do it twice. That's not going to be very productive. And of course, authentication. The plan is to use Samba's GenSec API for that, but it's a big unknown for me if it's going to work and how to make it work. You know, one thing at a time. We'll have to think about better memory management, because, you know, currently we're just copying values. So essentially you end up with double the memory of what would be used in a regular. You have one type, the OpenLDAP operation structure, and then the LDB request, and that's just unnecessary. So we'll have to work on that. And when we're done with the benchmarking, ready to do some benchmarking, we have to consider benchmarking strategies and how much better is actually better. Well, our chief technical officer, Howard Chu, most of you have heard of him, and basically he says, oh, at least 10 times. So this is what we'll try. It's nice to have a goal. Personally, I'm not sure, but we can try. Yeah, like I said, there will be huge, scary dragons. LDB thread safety is among the scariest. LDB was never meant to be thread safe. It's not written to be thread safe. Samba doesn't need it to be thread safe, but OpenLDAP does. So we will have to make it thread safe if we want to continue this work at all. And for the moment, it's a big scary dragon, because I have no idea where to start. I'm absolutely open to suggestions. If, you know, any of the Samba team can give me any advice, just shoot. Proper authentication, as I already mentioned, it's also a big unknown. And as usual, probably will turn out that the third dragon is the scariest, something we've never really thought about at the moment. So yeah, as I mentioned, I welcome suggestions for improvement, for ways to go from now on.